Everyone in the town of Harkins Mill knows of the legend of one-eyed Jack Faraday and his lost gold. As a boy, my friends and I would spend every summer day digging in the woods, hoping to find one of the missing 10,000 gold cold coins. We sure could have used the money, now valued at almost $20 million, for we didn't have much. No one in our little North Georgia mountain town had much. In the early 1800s, we were a prosperous settlement, the site of one of the first gold rushes in America, and home to a government mint. But the gold's long gone, and the soil's too poor for good farming. Every year, the town's population shrinks a little, but some of us hang around. Why did I stay? I can't really tell you, except something about these mountains feels like home. As to the legend, there are various tellings of it. Some have even claimed that the heist never happened, that it was made up to drum up tourism in the region. I can definitively say that that is false. As the director of our local historical society, I've researched the matter more than anyone and have done my best to set the record straight. To the best of my knowledge, here's what happened on that sultry summer day, Tuesday, July 21st, 1859, 7:30 a.m. Under the guard of 10 cavalrymen, 4 chests, each containing 2,500 gold coins, then valued at $10 each, leave the mint and are loaded into a wagon destined for the train depot approximately 2 miles north of the mint. The size of that guard was doubled that day, for One-Eyed Jack's gang had robbed a bank in Augusta earlier that week. John One-Eyed Jack Faraday immigrated from Ireland in 1843 and settled in Virginia. He had enlisted in the army during the Mexican-American War, but soon deserted. Subsequently, he led a gang of deserters who robbed banks and stagecoaches throughout the Southwest. The outlaw was known for wearing an oversized army jacket full of bullet holes. His billowy jacket had been shot dozens of times, but he himself had only been shot once in his left eye, giving rise to his moniker. He somehow survived and led a raid on a wagon train the following week, wearing an eye patch, but seemingly healthy. His last raid out west was in 1853. After many years of no sightings, he was presumed dead. That was until he turned up in the southeast in 1859. At approximately 7:50 on the outskirts of town, about 1 mile from the station, 12 members of Jack Faraday's gang descended from the mountains and ambushed the wagon party. In the ensuing gun battle, 4 of the outlaws are killed, along with 9 of the cavalrymen. The only surviving soldier reported seeing the surviving outlaws transfer the gold into burlap sacks before riding east into the mountains. Word of the robbery reached the nearby Fort Jackson. The soldiers there, along with some townspeople, quickly formed a posse and gave chase. At 2:30 in the afternoon, the outlaws were found holed up in an abandoned grist mill 7 miles east of the location of the heist. Although several of their men were severely wounded, they did not surrender. In the ensuing battle, 3 soldiers were killed, along with 7 of the 8 surviving outlaws. The only surviving member was One-Eyed Jack. Like a decade earlier, he had been shot through his left eye socket and, like before, miraculously managed to survive. None of the gold was ever recovered, not a single coin. It was speculated that the party had buried their gold. The mountain was scoured for weeks after the heist for signs of freshly dug holes, but none was located. Well shafts were searched to no avail. Bloodhounds were brought in, but they were unable to pick up any scent. The hardy men who lived in the mountains had their cabins and cellars raided, but not a single coin was found. The most common theory was that One-Eyed Jack's gang handed off the gold to some unknown conspirators who managed to escape. The families and associates of Jack's gang were questioned, their residences searched, but nothing was discovered. The only clue was a cryptic letter that Jack had written to his older brother, who lived several hundred miles north in Richmond, a month before the robbery. In it, he claimed to have made a deal with the little people of the hills to obtain eternal life. What he meant by that has been subject to much speculation. One-Eyed Jack didn't survive much longer after his capture. He was promptly tried and sentenced to hang. He was told that he would be spared the rope if he revealed the location of the gold. He declined, saying the gold was no longer his. When asked who the gold now belonged to, he remained silent. On August 18th, he went to the gallows. The whole town came out to see Jack hang. Some were hoping that he would drop a hint about the location of the treasure. He did no such thing. Instead, he cursed the judge who condemned him, the prosecutor, the jury, and the soldiers who hunted him down. And before the trap door fell, he cursed whoever might find his treasure, saying they would die that very night. The judge died the following week, accidentally shooting himself while cleaning his hunting rifle. The prosecutor died a month later, breaking his neck when he fell off his horse. Over the next 10 years, 6 of the 12 jurors perished, 4 while serving in the Civil War, and 2 from illness. Coincidence? Perhaps. Talk about the curse didn't stop people from searching for the treasure. As newspapers around the country picked up word of the heist, thousands of people descended upon the town to search for the gold. The local paper reported that on a typical weekend that fall, several hundred men would disembark from the train from as far away as Galveston and Joplin, picks and shovels in hand, to search for Jack's loot. The number of boarding houses in the town doubled, and the number of brothels tripled. Nothing was ever found, not a single coin. The number of treasure hunters slowly dwindled, but according to newspaper articles, a few remained until the outbreak of the Civil War. After the war ended, the treasure seemed to have been forgotten. The locals still knew about it. I remember my grandfather telling me stories of him searching for the treasure as a boy in the late 1800s, but the outside world seemed to have forgot about it. Even the government didn't pursue the case any further. The Treasury Department records showed that the case was not reopened after the war. In the local newspaper, there were only 2 mentions of One-Eyed Jack between 1865 and 1975. One of them was the 1925 obituary of a prominent doctor. It noted that he had served on the jury that had condemned One-Eyed Jack, one of the lucky ones that didn't succumb to the curse. The second was an anonymous letter published in 1947. The writer claimed that she was a young girl in 1859 and remembers seeing her father store several sacks of gold in her basement. She then claimed that in 1862, the gold was handed off to several Confederate soldiers. One-Eyed Jack was mentioned in several history books and academic papers published during that period, but the robbery in Georgia was only given a few paragraphs at most. One reason might be that one volume, published in 1867, underestimated the value of the robbery by a factor of 10. This volume was apparently used as a source by later works, as they almost always misstated the value. The only in-depth treatment given to the heist was a doctoral dissertation published by a student at the Emory University in 1924. The author, James Benton, interviewed dozens of townspeople who lived during that time, as well as several of the surviving treasure hunters. His monograph focused mainly on how the town was transformed by the influx of treasure workers, but he did interview one woman, Mary Seal, who claimed that her uncle had found 15 gold coins a few months after the robbery in the mountains to the west of town. Benton, without citing any other sources, concluded that Seal's account was accurate and claimed that One-Eyed Jack's gang handed off the gold to unknown conspirators who transported the gold west, heading to Rome, Georgia, before transporting the loot downriver. Curiously, census records contain no mention of Mary Seal or any family by the name of Seal living in North Georgia around the time of the heist. She is also not mentioned in any of the county birth, marriage, death, tax, or probate records. The same is true for several other people Benton claimed to interview. Either he used pseudonyms or completely fabricated some of the interviews. Regardless, his account should be given little weight. There are 2 other references of note to the treasure. One of them was an illustrated children's book published in Berlin in 1934 dealing with various lost treasures, including One-Eyed Jack's. It provided a fairly accurate description of the robbery, even getting the number of coins correct, although the colored prints illustrating One-Eyed Jack place his eye patch incorrectly on his right eye. How a German author knew about the robbery will probably remain a mystery. The other was found in one of Flannery O'Connor's early short stories, The Pendulum, published in the Sewanee Review in 1948. When asked about the whereabouts of her husband, one of the characters, a preacher's wife named Annie Jackson, responds with he's probably up in the mountains, searching for the treasure of One-Eyed Jack. Hal O'Connor, a native of Milledgeville in central Georgia, will also probably remain a mystery. The story is one of her lesser-known ones, and has received little scholarly attention. The one paper that I found that refers to the line about One-Eyed Jack was published by Christina Stewart, a professor at the University of Georgia, in 1957. In it, she writes, Annie Jackson's husband is a Baptist minister, but instead of attending his flock, he seeks out the treasure of One-Eyed Jack, the Caribbean pirate Calico Jack, in, of all places, the Georgia mountains. The fact that Stewart, along with her colleagues who certainly reviewed her paper, had no clue who One-Eyed Jack was shows how, even in Georgia, the notorious outlaw had been forgotten. That all changed in 1975, when famed treasure hunter Roland Kent descended on our sleepy mountain town with a film crew. Having learned about the robbery from an old newspaper article, he spent weeks searching for the treasure. He never found anything, but the documentary was shown on ABC stations all over the country. As it had in 1859, Harkins Mill became overrun by treasure hunters. Even today, teams of professional treasure hunters, armed with the latest metal detectors, descend on our town every now and then. Probably every square inch of ground within 30 miles of town has been searched thoroughly. If someone found the gold, they didn't tell anyone. Until last month, I believed the treasure was long gone. That was until I received a package addressed to me at the Historical Society, and it was a diary written by Father Joseph O'Connell. I knew the name of the priest from Atlanta who gave One-Eyed Jack his last rites. On the first page of the diary, he writes about the night before the hanging, when he visited Jack in his cell. The condemned sat alone in the noxious cell, no company save for rats and other vermin. He did not move when I came to the bars, but stared intently at one of the stone walls, grinning. I called out in greeting, but he paid me no mind. I presumed him to be a madman, living in his own world, but then, suddenly, he turned his head and his gaze met mine. We proceeded to chat amicably for several hours. I learned that we were from the same small village in County May, and although separated in age by 40 years, we talked of several shared acquaintances. After I had administered him his rites and had turned to leave, he called back to me. He thanked me for his kindness and told me the location of the treasure. It was hidden in a cellar in the mountains, about a mile east of the location, next to an abandoned cabin that previously belonged to a Mr. Atkins. The corpse of an ancient oak tree, having been killed by lightning, stood nearby. I was told that the treasure could only be found on a night illuminated by a full moon. I asked why, presuming it was that the shine of the moon would cast a glow over the location of the gold. He told me why. I did not, and do not believe him, but if what he told was true, his sins are far more grievous than the murders and robberies he committed. There was no return address on the package, no letter inside, nothing to indicate who sent me this diary or why, just a Apalachicola, Florida postmark. I questioned if it was even authentic, wondered if someone was playing a prank on me. I read the other entries, but there was no further mention of Jack, nothing that would indicate that the priest had ever searched for the treasure. Quick research revealed that he had died 11 years later, still a priest. No record of him ever making a large donation to the church. As for the cellar mentioned in the diary, I knew it. I had been there several times as a boy, and hundreds of treasure hunters had visited it since. If the treasure was ever buried there, it had been found long ago. But, as this was the first clue I'd ever found, I decided to check it out. As luck would have it, tonight was a full moon, whatever significance that had. I started my journey shortly after sunset, leaving the Historical Society. I looked at the 30 feet high statue of One-Eyed Jack that stood outside, a popular spot for tourists to take photos. The statue's face is expressionless, but that night I could have sworn he was smiling. I went home to grab a shovel, flashlight, and metal detector and then set off towards the cabin. Storms were approaching from the south, and I hoped they would hold off long enough for me to search the cellar. A paved road had been constructed through the mountains in the late 1940s, so I only had to travel a tenth of a mile or so on foot to reach the cabin, careful to avoid stepping in any of the holes the treasure hunters had left. The storms were getting closer, but the sky above was clear. The full moon shined directly overhead the cabin. I climbed down the steps to the cellar and took out my metal detector. The earthen floor was full of potholes, evidence of the seekers who had come before me. Still, I took out my metal detector. In the center of the cabin, where a shaft of moonlight struck, it started beeping. Hearing the thunder getting closer, I started digging quickly. Less than a foot down, I uncovered a burlap sack. I ripped it open. Inside were innumerable gold coins. I picked one up, examining the mint marks. They all looked authentic, but it couldn't be the treasure. That was impossible. This place had been searched thoroughly, even if the army missed the freshly dug hole during their search. Teams of later treasure hunters would have found it long ago. It must have been planted recently. Someone must be playing an elaborate prank on me. But who? I was thinking no one would ever find it, said a voice behind me. I turned, and in the moonlight I saw the translucent figure of one-eyed Jack, hovering a foot above the cellar's earthen floor. I've seen dozens of men wave their witching rods to and fro across the dirt. Some have even dug in the spot where I hid the loot, but none came here at night when the moon was full. Lucky for them. Do you not know what happens to the finder? They die, and you will die this very night, and the little ones will devour your flesh. You're just a ghost, I said, not believing my eyes. You're dead. You can't hurt me. He laughed. We will see about that. The coins multiplied, spilling out of the sack. Gold was cascading from the walls, raining from the ceiling. As one-eyed Jack laughed, I ran to the stairs, but I was no longer a young man and was quickly overcome by the rising tide of gold. I fell to the ground. I tried to get up, but the weight of the gold was too much. The last thing I saw before my face was covered was the outlaw's grinning face. I gasped for breath. It was next to impossible to breathe. I felt like my chest would collapse any second under the weight, which was growing by the second. I was going to die soon. Underneath the gold, I heard the laughter of Jack. Then, suddenly, the gold vanished, along with the ghost of Jack. I looked through the cellar door, where a storm cloud had obscured the moon. I climbed out of the cellar. Once outside, I looked back. I thought I saw a small human-like figure with piercing green eyes disappear into the hole I had just dug, the hole that held the treasure. Was this just a figment of my imagination, or one of the little people of the hills Jack had made his deal with? I will likely never know. All I knew was that I was alive, bruised, out of breath, but alive. 2 weeks later, I received an envelope at the Historical Society. This time it was postmarked Birmingham. No return address. Inside was a single gold coin along with a piece of parchment on which, in red ink, was drawn the smiling figure of one-eyed Jack. Around him in a circle were dozens of grinning imps, their teeth razor sharp. Below the drawing was this note: "We will meet again. Your friend, John Faherty."